Morning, everybody, or morning, nobody, till somebody joins. But yeah, give this a minute while people jump in. Okay, so I do want to just jump in. So good morning to folks who are joining in. Um, I'm director of social justice ministries, in case there's anybody new. But we've been doing a lot of interviews over the course of this month. But in August, I want to take a little break so that we can um, do a little more of a maybe like a Bible study, but it's very rapid, and so it may feel incomplete. And it'll be a series, and we'll do this each week for the month, um, and we'll do it in a way that is going to help us just maybe play with um, how we're looking at some of Scripture, um, but in particular in a moment where we are heading from here on into a time of political debate, and considering how we have life together in the public square, and how we might draw upon some theological concepts um, and historic realities to consider what that means for us as we figure out how we have life together now. So we'll do that with the Gospel of Mark, and in particular, we'll do it with this book, Render Unto God, Economic Vulnerability, Family Violence, Pastoral Theology. I don't recommend you read this book unless you really want to do a lot of reading about the pastoral theology piece. Um, it tends to be dense. We're only really looking at 2 chapters in here. But if you want to look at it, great. If you don't want to look at this and you want to look at something that's more Bible study oriented, then what this book draws upon a bunch is from the author Ched Myers. And Ched Myers has a book called Binding the Strong Man. And Binding the Strong Man is what polling pulls from quite a bit in Render Unto God. So we'll jump in. Now today, don't expect a lot of connecting to current events. Today is all about just trying to set some of the stage for where the Gospel of Mark is situated. And again, it might feel incomplete because we're doing it rapidly within like a 15-minute span. So I will do my best to stay engaged with the comments throughout the day. And if I can try and clarify something, I will do that as we go along. So let's start with trying to set the stage a bit about Mark, and that just means returning to some of our basics um, around the writing itself and the author of Mark. And so when we're thinking about this, we're talking about um, first century writing, and we're talking about specific community, specific problems, and specific time. Okay, so for as we're going to get deeper into this, and when we start to think about how the Gospel of Mark can be um, a critique of like systems and economies, then it's going to be really important to remember that all of this was written at a specific time. Now, using this book, Render Unto God, the Render Unto God piece is drawing from a particular scripture in Mark, and that's in chapter 12, verse 17. So, polling is using this in a very intentional way and drawing upon the Ched Myers interpretation and the question that Jesus is posed right before Mark 12:17. The question that is posed is basically, Should we pay taxes or not? That's kind of the way it's phrased. Does the law allow us to pay taxes? And so that is where if you remember, the answer comes back: render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. So you may have heard over the years a lot of different interpretations for this particular text. I would love to know, if you want to leave it in the comments, maybe some of the ways that you've encountered that particular piece of scripture over your lifetime. Where have you heard this one used? The inscription that is on the coin, and then where is God's inscription? That kind of stuff. So if you've got a particular interaction with that scripture, I would love to see it if you want to leave it in there. So as we make our way through this, we'll intentionally kind of play with a lens of interpretation that is critique. And I'm using the word play intentionally because I'm not offering this as like a prescriptive way of how you have to view something. I'm just offering it as a possible lens that we can use as we're thinking about how we're going to be a faithful community. And we do all of that with the Bible, which is itself a faithful community trying to work out how they have life together. I do think that the lens, with the particular concern around critique of systems that function oppressively, is something that is worth carrying forward for us. So while you might not, I don't want you to lose the ways that Scripture is important to you in your personal life, but I do want us to be able to play with an extra lens that can help us think about how we're having life together in the public square. And I do think that that is worth carrying forward because it can serve for us as a permanent landmark as we make our way through what we've kind of metaphorically referred to as a desert journey. So when we have a lens that can help us look at our systems, that can help us make our way through a desert that has shifting sands of events and times, and it can help draw us back to how is it that we should be looking at life together. So here is what for us is some of the basics and that we need to remember about Mark. The Gospel of Mark agreed to have been written generally among scholars in the 66 to 69 CE. So if you want to look at that as like 30 years after Jesus' ministry, that's probably fine. If you want to look at it as 60 to 70 years after Jesus' ministry, that's fine too. Just remember, it's not a minute by minute account of Jesus' ministry. It is after the fact, and it's Mark's author doing it for his community specifically. And the years where that's agreed to have happened, where there's 66 to 69 CE, is important because you have to remember what some of the significant historic events are at that period, because that's what affects how the author approaches the Jesus story and how the Jesus character in Mark's gospel is then interacting for that community. So if we remember that, then we also must remember that Mark's community is Jewish. I'm not even sure it's really fair to call it like the early Christian church at that point. It's a Jewish community living with a Jesus narrative. And if anything, it's the birthing of what would eventually become the Christian church. But at this point, it's just kind of what's sometimes referred to as a Jesus movement in the midst of a Jewish community. So Mark's gospel isn't really written for an audience of the Christian church, and it's not really written for necessarily a Gentile audience. It is a Jewish community, and it is Mark's Jewish community. So let's always hold that in mind. The timing piece is significant because of what was present in terms of social and economic, and to the extent possible, political turmoil or change or upheaval, however you want to characterize it. There was significant strife between revolt and between occupation. In particular, Rome's colonial occupation of Jerusalem. when we talk about this 66 to 69 period, we talk about a significant time of revolt against Rome and Rome's governors like Herod, and we talk about significant revolt in the form of military revolt, um, as well as what could be phrased as non-alignment or rebellion. That's the type of thing that happens. And so at Mark's moment, there is actually a period where the Jewish community managed to revolt against Rome and get them out of Jerusalem. And so as the writing is happening, these are some of the things that are going on. Now, if you manage to get Rome out of Jerusalem, all that means is you're going to hold it for a minute before Rome comes back and takes it back over with the military force of Rome. So these are the tensions, right? Can we hold this? Can we hold this militarily? Can we stand against Rome militarily? These are the questions, and it becomes debate within the Jewish community of how do we resist occupation? How do we resist Rome? Do we do it militarily or not? And so this is why the particular scripture of is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Rome is fraught. And like I've invited you to maybe share some of the ways you've engaged it, but I've heard it engaged, you know, literally in the sense of should we currently be paying taxes or something like that. And that is not what Poling and Myers are saying this scripture really means. They are looking at this scripture, and this is what I think is important for us to remember, truly as a trick question for Jesus, and a trick question such that it will expose for those around, is Jesus aligning with the occupying force, or is Jesus aligning with the rebelling militarized force? And so for the moment, the audience that we've talked about would understand that if Jesus were to answer, yes, pay tribute to Rome, then that outs Mark and his community through the Jesus character, that outs him as collaborating with the colonial powers. If Jesus in the Mark narrative answers, no, you should not pay taxes to Rome, then that outs Jesus in the story and therefore Mark's community as aligning with the rebelling militarized Jewish force. Either of those answers is incredibly problematic. If you align yourself with the occupying Roman force, you become the target of the militarized rebelling Jewish group. If you align yourself with the militarized rebelling group, you become the target of the Roman military force. So what we see is Jesus has been set up to have to choose between these two poles. You're either this or you're that. And what Myers and Poling suggests is that the answer Jesus gives is one of non-alignment with either. And they're suggesting that Jesus is offering a third option that will take the community into a different form of rebelling against oppression. Here's why that's important. It does not say that Jesus collaborates with Rome over against the subjugation of the community around him. And it does not say that Jesus subscribes to the militarized rebellion that people put their faith in at that moment. Because if you are the subject of an occupying force, you will never be able to muster the military force necessary to truly expel and hold. And more, you align yourself into the same forms of violence that you originally were fighting against. And so Jesus' answers comes back render to Caesar what is Caesar's, render to God what is God's, knowing that his community could never make a clear connection between the debt that the Jewish community owes to God and the debt that a tribute system to Rome encouraged. They're two different things completely. And so instead of outing himself as being either aligned with one or the other, he he chooses a path of non-alignment with either, while still embedding himself with his community, which is the poor, oppressed community of the time. So this is going to be important for us to remember over the coming weeks. Jesus' particular community, and especially Mark's, is one of the oppressed poor people. He is not aligned and benefiting from the occupation. That's incredibly important for us to remember, because we tend, and I'm talking about us, the Foundry community, most of us tend to enjoy the benefits of the power class. I do, and I know that, and that is all kinds of forms of privilege, whether it's white privilege or whether it's just some of your day-to-day forms of privilege in terms of being housed, having a job, earning income. We enjoy those things at a rate that the exploited groups do not. So we've got to remember our context, because we are looking at it from the center of empire more than from the periphery of empire. And so some of this, as we go over the next couple of weeks, may feel very distant for us, and that's fine. Our job is to wrestle with our own context and bear in mind the context of the writers and the original communities. Last thing I want to say for today, because all we wanted to do today was give some context. It's really critical for us to remember that the Mark community and the Jesus community are ones who are experiencing domination. And the way that Myers talks about the domination of the time is that the power class dominates the economy and the population in such a way that they extract from the labors of the lower classes. They extract from those labors their own economic benefit, while that benefit does not necessarily extend to the actual laborers. You can go ahead and make whatever connection you want throughout history, whether it's the institutions of slavery or whether it's the institutions of non-living wages. You can go ahead and start making those connections in your head if you want, but I want you to bear in mind that we are talking in particular in Mark about an occupied colonial setting where the farming community of Galilee is particularly subjugated in such a way that they never have enough housing, health care, or wage to care for themselves while working and their labor being used to care for the ruling classes. So they are left without while the extractors get everything that they need. That is the community and the situation that Jesus is born into, and that is the community and situation that Jesus has his ministry, and that is the community that Mark writes in after the fact, but with the same and very similar concerns. They are practical, they are physical, and they are directly related to the way that the economy and the political systems were functioning at the time. So with that, we'll end for today. And like I said, it may feel incomplete, but next week when we get back together, we'll actually look at some of the political and economic system that I'm talking about in this moment. We'll take a deeper dive into how those systems functioned, both as they were intended to function, but then as they actually functioned and became oppressive through tribute systems, through purity systems, and through redistribution systems that failed. So we'll look at that next week, and we'll take that time together. So thanks for joining. Again, if you want to leave comments, I'll try and stay as engaged as I can throughout the day. If there's something I can work to clarify. Otherwise, I will see you next week or later on today. Bye, friends. Have a good Friday. We'll see you later.